The rain hammered against the tin roof of the auction barn, a steady rhythm echoing in the dim space. Weathered men, their faces lined from years of labor, leaned on the wooden railing, watching the last few horses being led through the ring. Standing on damp straw was a chestnut-colored horse, his coat dull and his eyes tired. His ribs showed beneath his skin, and his tangled mane hung limp over his neck. He looked like a creature from another time, forgotten by the world. The auctioneer, a thin man with a patchy mustache named Virgil Henshaw, tapped his gavel against the podium. And here we have an unregistered horse, old, no known pedigree. Let's start at $50. Silence filled the barn. The buyers had come for strong, pedigreed animals, not one that could barely hold its head up. Off to the side, a man in a battered hat and a thoughtful expression stroked his graying beard. His name was Ambrose Callaway, a stubborn farmer who'd seen too many animals thrown away. He let out a long breath, hesitated, and then raised his hand. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the crowd. Ambrose and his useless strays, someone muttered. He ignored the whispers. The gavel came down once more. Sold to Mr. Ambrose couldn't quite explain why he'd bought the horse. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was instinct. But something about this animal felt different. What he didn't know was that by loading the horse into his rusty trailer and taking him home, he was bringing a long-buried secret to his farm, a secret that would change everything. The old truck rattled down the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the thick evening fog. The rhythmic sound of hooves shifting in the rusty trailer echoed through the night. Ambrose gripped the steering wheel, the weight of the auction heavy in his chest. He had no business buying another horse, especially one in such poor shape. His farm wasn't what it used to be. The barns were aging, the fences needed mending, and money was tight. But something in the horse's eyes had struck him deep. It wasn't just exhaustion or neglect. It was something else, something he couldn't place. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time he pulled up to his farm. The wooden gate creaked as he swung it open, mud thick under his boots. He backed the trailer in, switched off the engine, and stepped out, breathing in the damp scent of earth and hay. The farm was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of trees. Ambrose unlatched the trailer door and stepped back. For a moment the horse didn't move. He stood there, ears flicking at the sounds of the night, his breath coming in slow, heavy puffs. Then, with a reluctant step, he walked down the ramp. Ambrose watched as the horse hesitated, then lifted his head slightly, as if taking in his surroundings. The dim barn lights cast a golden glow over the paddock, revealing more of his condition up close. Ambrose could see old scars along his legs, a faded white stripe running down his forehead. His ribs pressed against his skin, but despite his frail appearance, there was a controlled, deliberate strength in the way he moved, as if each step carried purpose. "Well, guess we better get you settled in," Ambrose muttered, patting the horse's neck gently. The horse flinched at the touch, not in fear, but in a way that made Ambrose pause. It was almost as if he was waiting for something. Ambrose led him into the barn, guiding him to an empty stall that smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth. He filled a bucket with water, watching as the horse took a cautious sip before stepping back. He wasn't desperate or frantic like most neglected animals. He was controlled, composed. Ambrose folded his arms, studying him. The horse simply blinked, his deep brown eyes unreadable. It was only then, as Ambrose leaned against the stall door, that he noticed something strange. A marking partially hidden beneath the mud and grime caked on the horse's side. It was faint, almost invisible under the dim light, but unmistakable. It was a brand, an old, weathered brand. Ambrose's heart skipped a beat. That mark, it was familiar, too familiar. His stomach twisted as long-buried memories clawed their way to the surface. And for the first time that night, Ambrose felt something close to fear. Ambrose couldn't tear his eyes away from the brand on the horse's side. He stepped closer, brushing his calloused fingers over the faded marking, clearing away dried mud. His breath hitched. The shape was unmistakable, a circle with an arrow through it. He took a slow step back, his pulse quickening. That brand belonged to Holston Stables, one of the most prestigious racing barns in the country, a place known for breeding champions worth more than entire farms like his. But how did a horse from such a place end up half-starved at a backwoods auction for $50? The realization sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just some nameless, unwanted horse. This animal had a history, one someone had clearly tried to erase. Ambrose swallowed hard. He needed answers. He turned to the tack room where an old, dust-covered filing cabinet sat wedged between stacks of forgotten saddles and rusting tools. His hands trembled slightly as he rummaged through a drawer of faded documents and dog-eared auction catalogues. He'd spent years attending sales, keeping notes on bloodlines, brands, and barns, a habit from when he used to dream big, back when he thought he might make a name for himself in the horse world. Flipping through brittle pages, his eyes darted from one old listing to another, and then suddenly there it was, a photograph. A younger version of the same horse, his coat shining, muscles lean and defined. He stood tall, a champion's fire in his eyes. Below the picture, a name was printed in bold, elegant letters: Waymaker, sired by Iron Legacy, owned by Holston Stables. Ambrose exhaled sharply. He'd heard that name before. Everyone had. Waymaker wasn't just some horse, he was a legend. 5 years ago, he'd been one of the most promising racehorses in the country. People called him the horse with heart, known for coming from behind in impossible races, defying the odds. But then one day he disappeared. No one knew why. The racing world had whispered rumors, an injury, a scandal, a cover-up, but no solid answer ever came until now. Ambrose looked from the old photograph to the frail, tired creature in front of him. It seemed impossible. How had this once great champion fallen so far, and why had someone wanted to get rid of him so badly? The horse, Waymaker, stood quietly in the stall, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. Ambrose felt a chill crawl up his spine. Somewhere, somehow, someone didn't want this horse to be found. And now he was tangled up in something much bigger than he'd ever bargained for. Ambrose sat at his worn wooden table, the dim glow of the farmhouse lamp casting long shadows. The old racing catalogue lay open before him, Waymaker's picture staring back as if demanding answers. His mind raced. How had a horse once worth millions ended up abandoned at a backwoods auction, sold for pennies? And more importantly, who had let that happen? Outside, the barn creaked as wind howled through the trees. Waymaker was settled for the night, but Ambrose couldn't shake the unease crawling through his chest. He reached for the old rotary phone on the wall, his fingers hovering over the dial. There was only one person he could call. With a deep breath he dialed. After 3 rings, a voice answered. Ambrose huffed. Levi Grayson had once been a top trainer in the racing world before a messy falling out with Holston Stables. He and Ambrose went way back. "Tell me you didn't just call me for a bedtime story." Levi's voice was gruff, laced with suspicion. Ambrose leaned forward, gripping the receiver. "I bought a horse today, old, neglected." Silence. Ambrose hesitated. A sharp exhale on the other end of the line. Positive. The line went quiet for a moment. Ambrose thought Levi had hung up. "My farm." The line clicked dead. Ambrose sat back, exhaling slowly. Whatever was going on, Levi clearly knew something, and judging by his reaction, it wasn't anything good. The next morning, just as the sun broke over the hills, a battered black pickup truck rolled down Ambrose's long dirt driveway. Levi stepped out, his tall frame stiff with tension. His once dark hair was now streaked with grey, deep lines creasing his face. He looked around wearily before striding toward the barn. Waymaker stood in his stall, ears flicking forward as Levi approached. For a long moment, Levi simply stared at him. Then in a low voice he murmured, "Son of a..." Ambrose crossed his arms. "Tell me what's going on, Levi." Levi dragged a hand down his face. Because Ambrose, Waymaker wasn't just thrown away. Ambrose felt a chill settle in his bones. A tense silence filled the barn, broken only by the occasional sound of Waymaker shifting in his stall. Ambrose studied Levi's face, searching for answers. The older man looked shaken, truly shaken, and that wasn't something Ambrose had seen in him before. "Start talking, Levi," Ambrose demanded, his voice low. "Who would want to get rid of a horse like this?" Levi exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "Holston Stables isn't just any racing barn." Ambrose narrowed his eyes. Levi hesitated, then turned to look at the horse, his expression unreadable. 5 years ago he was their golden boy, fast, strong, heart like no other. Ambrose frowned. "Disappeared." Levi shook his head. "No, they didn't lose him." A heavy weight settled in Ambrose's chest. "There were rumors," Levi continued. "Some folks said he was injured and Holston didn't want the bad press. Others thought maybe he tested positive for something that would have ruined their reputation." Ambrose leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. Levi glanced around the barn as if expecting someone to be listening. Ambrose scoffed. "He's a horse, Levi." Levi's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But I do know that Holston doesn't just throw away champions." Ambrose glanced at Waymaker. The horse stood still, watching them with those deep, intelligent eyes. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet control, the sharp awareness, was unlike any horse Ambrose had ever owned. Ambrose asked. Levi's voice was grim. "You either hide him or you find out the truth." He met his eyes, his face deadly serious. "If Holston finds out Waymaker is still alive, they won't just come for him." A cold knot of fear twisted in Ambrose's gut. He'd spent his whole life keeping his head down, staying out of trouble. But now, without meaning to, he'd walked straight into something dangerous, and there was no turning back. A cold wind swept through the open barn doors, rattling the wooden beams overhead. Ambrose felt the weight of Levi's words settle deep in his chest. The thought sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. He'd never been the kind of man to go looking for trouble, but somehow trouble had found him anyway. Waymaker shifted in his stall, his ears twitching as if sensing the tension in the air. The old horse was no ordinary animal. Ambrose was sure of that now. But whether he was a key to some buried secret or just an inconvenient reminder of something Holston Stables wanted to forget, one thing was clear: keeping him here was a risk. Levi let out a slow breath and turned toward the barn entrance, his boots crunching against the straw-covered floor. "Then tell me," Ambrose said, his voice firm. Levi hesitated before glancing toward the horse once more. "Holston Stables isn't just a racing operation. They've got deep pockets, high-powered connections. They've covered up scandals before." Ambrose frowned. "Plan?" Levi's expression darkened. "Maybe, maybe not." A tense silence filled the barn. Ambrose leaned against the stall, his arms crossed tightly. His farm had always been his sanctuary, his escape from the world. But now it felt different, exposed, vulnerable. A sudden noise outside made both men turn their heads sharply, the distant sound of tires crunching over gravel. Ambrose's heart pounded as he stepped toward the barn door, peering out into the night. Headlights. A black SUV was crawling down the long driveway, moving slow, deliberate. "Damn it," Levi muttered under his breath. Ambrose clenched his jaw. He had lived a quiet life for decades, avoiding trouble. But now he was standing in the middle of it, and the men in that SUV weren't here to make conversation. He turned back to Waymaker, who stood tall and still in his stall, watching everything with quiet intelligence. The SUV came to a stop, the engine idling, and then a car door opened. The low rumble sent a pulse of unease through Ambrose's chest. He wiped his hands on his jeans, forcing himself to stay calm. Whoever these people were, they weren't here by accident. Levi's jaw tightened. "Stay quiet." Ambrose wasn't so sure about that, but he nodded. A second car door opened. Two figures stepped out, both men dressed too clean for farm life. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black wool coat over an expensive-looking shirt. The other was shorter, wiry, with sharp eyes that flicked toward the barn like he already knew what was inside. Ambrose stepped onto the porch, his boots scraping against the wooden planks. The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ambrose took his time before answering. The man in the wool coat pulled a sleek leather wallet from his pocket, flipping it open. A badge, Richard Holston. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind that didn't need to be loud to command attention. Ambrose's stomach twisted. Holston. The man standing on his porch was the Richard Holston, whose stable had produced dozens of champion race horses. A man who rarely left his Kentucky estate unless it was for something that truly mattered. Ambrose forced his expression to stay neutral. Holston smiled again, tucking the badge away. "Apologies for the hour, I won't take much of your time." Ambrose crossed his arms. Holston's gaze flickered toward the barn. Ambrose felt Levi shift slightly beside him. Holston's smile never wavered. "Of course, but this particular one." Ambrose's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew this was coming, but hearing the words made his skin prickle. Holston nodded. "We had a horse go missing some years back. Waymaker, a real beauty, but he vanished without a trace, never knew what happened to him." Ambrose swallowed hard, keeping his expression unreadable. Holston's smile faded slightly. "Then I'd like to buy him back." Silence. Levi finally spoke, his voice low. "Seems funny." Mr. Holston barely glanced at him. "I'm not here to talk about the past." Ambrose clenched his fists at his sides. Every instinct told him not to trust this man. Waymaker wasn't just a lost horse to Holston, he was a problem, and problems like this didn't get a second chance. "I appreciate the offer," Ambrose said carefully. The wiry man beside Holston finally spoke, his voice colder, sharper. A long silence stretched between them. Holston exhaled through his nose, adjusting the cuff of his coat. "Think it over, Mr. Callaway." He turned without another word, walking back to the SUV. The wiry man hesitated, eyes locking onto Ambrose like a silent threat, then followed. The doors shut, the engine revved, and then just as quietly as they came, they were gone. Ambrose let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Levi muttered a curse. That wasn't a request. Ambrose turned back toward the barn, his jaw set. Then they just made a mistake too. The distant hum of the SUV's engine had long faded into the night, but the weight of Holston's words still lingered in the cold air. Ambrose stood on the porch, staring down the empty road, his jaw tight. Every instinct in him told him one thing: Holston wasn't done. Levi let out a slow breath beside him. Ambrose nodded, his eyes dark with determination. "Yeah, they don't just want Waymaker back." Levi gave him a sharp look. Ambrose turned, walking toward the barn. Inside, the old wooden structure was dimly lit, the scent of hay and horse sweat filling the air. Waymaker stood in his stall, ears twitching as Ambrose approached. The horse had been watching them the entire time, silent, waiting. Ambrose placed a firm hand on his neck, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. Waymaker exhaled, his breath hot against the cool air. Levi leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. Ambrose nodded. The next morning, Ambrose and Levi sat at the worn wooden table in the farmhouse, a laptop open between them. The glow of the screen flickered across their tired faces as they scrolled through article after article, searching for any mention of Waymaker's disappearance. But none of them had answers, no official statements from Holston Stables, no evidence of injury, no explanation for how $1 million horse could simply vanish. Levi grunted. Ambrose rubbed his temple. Then, buried deep in the search results, he found it. A small, forgotten blog post from a former track employee. He clicked. The page loaded slowly, the text grainy and cluttered with ads. Ambrose and Levi exchanged glances. Ambrose started reading aloud. "I worked at Holston Stables for 3 years. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. And the night before Waymaker disappeared, something happened at that barn." A cold chill ran down Ambrose's spine. The post went on to describe a heated argument between Richard Holston and an unknown man. The employee claimed he'd overheard snippets of their conversation, something about a deal gone wrong and someone paying the price. But the most chilling part was at the bottom of the post. Waymaker didn't just disappear, he was meant to disappear. The words sent a shudder through the room. Levi leaned back, exhaling sharply. Son of a Ambrose's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. This isn't just about a horse. Levi nodded. Ambrose looked toward the barn where Waymaker stood, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. The farmhouse felt smaller, the air heavier. Ambrose stared at the words on the screen. Waymaker didn't just disappear, he was meant to disappear. Levi let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the table. Holston didn't just cover up a missing horse. Ambrose's jaw tightened. And if someone died, it means there's proof somewhere. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. It wasn't frantic, but it wasn't friendly either. Levi moved first, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle leaning against the wall. Ambrose peered through the small window. A young woman stood on the porch, her dark jacket soaked from the misty morning air. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, but when she saw Ambrose watching, she lifted her chin with quiet determination. Ambrose hesitated before pulling the door open. The woman swallowed hard. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Levi stiffened beside him. Claire's voice was firm but urgent. I know about Waymaker. Ambrose exchanged a glance with Levi, then stepped aside. Claire sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Ray Lawson was my father, she said, her voice quieter now. He worked for Holston Stables for years. But 5 years ago something changed. He found out something he wasn't supposed to. Levi exhaled sharply. Claire nodded, eyes dark with grief. Holston said it was an accident, that my father was drunk and fell from the hayloft. But my dad didn't drink. Her hands trembled as she pulled a small flash drive from her jacket and placed it on the table. This has security footage from that night. My father must have known something was coming because he hid this before they got to him. It shows everything. Holston arguing with my dad, the fight. Ambrose stared at the tiny piece of plastic and metal, knowing it held the key to everything. Proof, Levi muttered. But before anyone could move, the sound of tires on gravel. Levi rushed to the window, his face darkening. Black SUV. Claire's breath hitched. A gunshot shattered the front window, glass spraying across the room. Levi yelled, grabbing Claire by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. Ambrose didn't think, he just acted. Get to the barn. Another shot rang out as they ran, but Ambrose wasn't worried about himself anymore. They weren't just coming for them, they were coming to finish what they started. Gunfire shattered the night as Ambrose, Levi and Claire bolted toward the barn, their breaths ragged. A bullet struck the truck's windshield, glass raining onto the mud, but Ambrose didn't slow. Waymaker was their only way out. He threw open the stall door, locking eyes with the horse. The fire was still there, the heart of a champion. No saddle, no time. Ambrose swung onto his back, Claire scrambling up behind him. Levi mounted another horse just as Holston's men rushed toward the barn, guns raised. Ambrose kicked Waymaker's sides, and the old racehorse exploded forward as if he had never stopped running. Hooves thundered against the rain-soaked earth, his muscles working in perfect rhythm. The SUV skidded through the mud, headlights bouncing wildly as they struggled to keep up, but they had no chance. Waymaker was built for this. Ahead, the railway bridge loomed, a death trap of rotting wood and rusted rails. It was their only shot. Waymaker lunged onto the bridge, hooves landing firm on the unstable planks. Ambrose held his breath as the boards groaned and splintered beneath them. Levi's horse followed just as the first SUV screeched to a halt at the edge. Then crack, a massive section of the bridge collapsed into the raging river below. Holston's men stood stranded, their path destroyed. They couldn't follow. Ambrose pulled Waymaker to a stop, his hands trembling as he patted the horse's damp neck. Levi's breath was heavy beside him, Claire still gripping his waist. They turned back to the wreckage, the bridge now nothing but debris. Claire exhaled shakily. Ambrose looked down at Waymaker, the horse standing tall, unshaken. A slow smile crossed his face. The world had forgotten him once. Now they would remember. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure you never miss a tale like it. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more. If this kept you on the edge of your seat, show your support with a like and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Your engagement helps bring more stories to life. Night Waymaker disappeared. Claire nodded, eyes dark with grief. Holston said it was an accident, that my father was drunk and fell from the hayloft, but my dad didn't drink. And he sure as hell didn't fall. Her hands trembled as she pulled a small flash drive from her jacket and placed it on the table. This has security footage from that night. My father must have known something was coming because he hid this before they got to him. It shows everything. Holston arguing with my dad, the fight, and what happened after. Ambrose stared at the tiny piece of plastic and metal, knowing it held the key to everything. Proof, Levi muttered. This could bring Holston down. But before anyone could move, the sound of tires on gravel. Levi rushed to the window, his face darkening. Black SUV, same as before. Claire's breath hitched. They found me. A gunshot shattered the front window, glass spraying across the room. Move, Levi yelled, grabbing Claire by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. Ambrose didn't think, he just acted. Get to the barn. We ride. Another shot rang out as they ran, but Ambrose wasn't worried about himself anymore. They weren't just coming for them. They were coming to finish what they started. Gunfire shattered the night as Ambrose, Levi, and Claire bolted toward the barn, their breaths ragged. A bullet struck the truck's windshield, glass raining onto the mud, but Ambrose didn't slow. Waymaker was their only way out. He threw open the stall door, locking eyes with the horse. The fire was still there, the heart of a champion. No saddle, no time. Ambrose swung onto his back, Claire scrambling up behind him. Levi mounted another horse just as Holston's men rushed toward the barn, guns raised. Go! Ambrose kicked Waymaker's sides, and the old racehorse exploded forward as if he had never stopped running. Hooves thundered against the rain-soaked earth, his muscles working in perfect rhythm. The SUV skidded through the mud, headlights bouncing wildly as they struggled to keep up, but they had no chance. Waymaker was built for this. Ahead, the railway bridge loomed, a death trap of rotting wood and rusted rails. It was their only shot. Waymaker lunged onto the bridge, hooves landing firm on the unstable planks. Ambrose held his breath as the boards groaned and splintered beneath them. Levi's horse followed just as the first SUV screeched to a halt at the edge. Then, crack. A massive section of the bridge collapsed into the raging river below. Holston's men stood stranded, their path destroyed. They couldn't follow. Ambrose pulled Waymaker to a stop, his hands trembling as he patted the horse's damp neck. Levi's breath was heavy beside him, Claire still gripping his waist. They turned back to the wreckage, the bridge now nothing but debris. Claire exhaled shakily. We made it. Ambrose looked down at Waymaker, the horse standing tall, unshaken. A slow smile crossed his face. Hell of a run, old man. The world had forgotten him once. Now they would remember. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure you never miss a tale like it. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more. If this kept you on the edge of your seat, show your support with a like and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Your engagement helps bring more stories to life.